Hey guys, it is December 27th, 2024, our last podcast of this calendar year. Matt Gurney and Jen Gerson here. We're going to get you caught up on everything happening in Canada. Jen has some spicy thoughts on what treason even means in this country. We're going to get into that in a minute as we talk about Mr. Trump's pitch for us being the 51st state. I am going to praise Jen. She saw something that I think she was ahead of the curve on everyone else. I think she saw what Mr. Trump was really doing. A few other stories as well, including a special call to action for our paid subscribers. All that and more in the latest episode of the Line Podcast. This episode of the Line Podcast has been brought to you by Unsmoke Canada. Canada can be a global leader in reducing the harm caused by smoking, but it requires actionable steps, including giving adult smokers the information they need to choose potentially less harmful alternatives. Learn more at unsmoke.ca. All right, here we are. We have survived Christmas, if you call this living. Christmas with kids is a lot. Jen, we'll keep this brief, but you guys made out okay? It was smooth?
We did fantastic. We had a very low-key Christmas. It was just the four of us. We had a gigantic roast beef. Everybody else does turkey for Christmas. We've broken with tradition. We do a really fancy high-end prime rib roast beef. And I go to my local Bonton meat market. We get like the fatty cut of the prime rib roast, and I cook it to absolute perfection. I did it also with a demi-glace juice. So I spent 2 days boiling beef bones and then, baking beef bones and then boiling down the beef stock into like a really super thick meat goop that turned the gravy black. It was fantastic.
We was not just the four of us. We had 19 at my house. You're
more popular than me.
We had salmon, we had brisket, and we had brisket and latkes. We had roast beef and Yorkshire puddings. It was a real multicultural thing where we had latkes and Yorkshire pudding being served at the same meal. Mm-hmm. A true Canadian multiculturalism success story. I don't dislike turkey. Like if someone serves me turkey, I'm not like you. But like to me, turkey is pretty far down the rankings in what I want to be served on a holiday. So like a ham, a salmon, a roast. I did a 4-pound tenderloin. It was good, and we still got lots. So we'll get back to eating that.
I would just say, on that note, because I do want to add a controversial point. I love turkey. I don't need turkey 2 times a year, a month apart, or 2 months apart. You know what I mean? Like I do turkey on Thanksgiving. I'm happy with that. That's good. That gives me my turkey fix for the year, and then I'm happy to roll into Christmas with a beef-based roast, and then Easter I do ham.
I can't think of any major occasion where I would think to myself, you know what would be perfect? A turkey. Turkey would always be, for me, like third choice. And again, I'm not saying I don't like it. I do like the leftovers, like this. Like I like the whole thing of a turkey. But if it's kind of like a wedding menu, right? Like, will you have the beef, the ham, or the turkey? I'm never putting turkey first.
No, true.
So.
True.
All right, we want to start with one quick programming note before we throw ourselves right into the politics here. We are recording this episode on our normal schedule. This is being recorded at the normal time on the normal date. What is going to be different is next week. We're going to record that one early. Jen and I are both going to go to ground for a little bit. We're not even going to pretend to be able to stay on top of the news. You are going to get a Line Podcast next week. The format's going to be a little bit different. We're going to be answering your questions. And the way we're going to do this is that this is a specific call out to go to readtheline.ca. This is for obviously our paid subscribers only, because only they can leave them. In the comments on the Substack post for this podcast, leave us your questions. It can be to us both. It can be to Jen. It can be to me. It can be serious. It can be funny. We probably won't be able to get to all of them, but we're going to pick our favorite and we're going to actually answer them. And I know a bunch of you smartasses out there who are not paying close enough attention to what I just said are going to start leaving comments on YouTube. We're not going to answer those. We're only going to answer them from paid subscribers. This is a subscriber exclusive perk. You will get our attention if you give us your money. We cannot, like I told you guys a few weeks ago, I'm working on like my salesmanship, but like this is just the deal. If you are commenting on a free platform, we're ignoring you. If you're commenting at readtheline.ca where you have a paid account, you will get our attention. So that will be the next episode of the Line podcast. We will answer your questions, but we're recording it early, so don't wait. We're going to need those by early next week. So Jen, we'll start with the questions now. What do you think is happening right now in the realm of Canadian politics?
Well, it looks like as we prepared to record this podcast this morning, the Conservatives handed us a gift by giving us something to talk about. Thanks, Conservatives. I don't know if you did that on purpose, but if you did, we appreciate it. So the Conservatives essentially released, I don't know how they formally did this. It was just sort of circulated through me. They have announced that they have a plan to try and force a non-confidence motion forward through the Public Accounts Committee, which meets on January 7th. So like the day after we all get back, they're going to push forward some kind of non-confidence motion that they think, unless that confidence motion gets filibustered in committee, they think they can get to the floor of Parliament literally on the day that Parliament reconvenes on January 27th. So they're saying, we're not waiting around for Singh to pull the plug on this, essentially after he gets his pension vested. Screw you. We're going to try and push it to the floor on January 27th, which would force the government to fall January 27th, and we'd be heading into a writ period for probably, I think that would be an early March election, or mid-March election, depending on how the writ drops.
I was looking at the math on that. It would probably land like the first week of March.
Okay, now, but before anybody gets too excited, couple of notes.
There's a few things.
There's a couple of things. First thing is, Liberals can filibuster that in committee, and so could the Bloc, and so could the NDP. If they filibuster it in committee, it probably won't hit the floor by the 27th, and it may take a couple days afterwards. Secondly, Trudeau could prorogue. Trudeau could go back to the Governor General, say, this is heading into chaos territory. We need to prorogue until the budget hits.
Because that'll settle everything down.
That'll settle everything down. Yeah, exactly. No, that will not settle anything down. I don't think they can prorogue past March 26th. I think if my limited understanding of parliamentary procedure is correct, the Public Accounts Committee has to submit a budget or a spending plan by sort of March 26th. So they can't, the Liberals and the Bloc and the NDP can't filibuster past that date. And I think also you couldn't reasonably prorogue past that date because Parliament has actual appropriations to agree to. And how Parliament works is you can't, the one actual power of Parliament is the appropriation of funding, of public finances. So if you can't pass a budget, that's why a budget is a confidence motion. If you can't pass a budget, essentially government can't function, right? It's the knife under, it's the spending of money is essentially the knife under the blanket of how power operates in the country. So hitting up the Public Accounts Committee with a confidence motion, hitting that to the floor with a confidence motion, or the budget being a confidence motion is kind of how it's looking like this is going to end. The other option, as I said, is Trudeau could prorogue for a couple of months, but not that long, probably until about the end of March. The third option is that if the NDP and the Bloc don't filibuster the non-confidence motion in the Public Accounts Committee, they might still vote to give the government confidence on January 27th. So that's the other option. So now we're still left with the fundamental question that we were left with last week. Does Trudeau resign or does he not resign? If he does resign, does he prorogue so that the Liberals can hold a leadership race? Does the Governor General agree to allow him to prorogue to hold a leadership race? And how much time can he buy by proroguing for a leadership race? I think at max he can prorogue for 3 months, which technically doesn't meet, I believe, the Liberals' own constitution for how long they need to hold a leadership race. I think their constitution requires 4.
4 months, unless they jury rig it in some way, but yeah.
Unless they jury rig it, which of course, because the national executive is control of everything, they could jury rig it and just hope that nobody notices, I guess, whatever. But it still leaves you 3 months to select a new leader, and then that new leader will be going into will have to cease to prorogue Parliament, which again that will force a throne speech. So that will be the throne speech is the other confidence, the other vote that would require a confidence motion, And then he'd have to go into an election on a budget that he or she did not actually write. So defending a budget of the outgoing government, and then essentially Parliament is almost sure to fall on either the throne speech or the budget. So, I mean, we're kind of back to the point that we made last week, and that is the Liberals have run out of runway. They've run out of runway. They don't actually have the time needed to hold a leadership campaign, generate the public buzz for the new leader, introduce the new leader to the public, and have that leader have anything resembling the necessary name recognition required to host an election on this kind of a time frame. So look, it's totally possible that Trudeau will resign. As I said last week, he could have reached his fuck at a clock meter. He could resign any day now. He could resign the moment that we finish recording this podcast. Thanks, JT. That could absolutely happen. He could also have his caucus say, we're not going to vote for your government, so you have to resign or your government will fall on a confidence motion on the 27th. That could also happen. In which case, yeah, I mean, I don't even know what the scenario would, I don't even know I haven't even thought out that scenario.
I just nervously checked Twitter to make sure he hadn't resigned since we started. Doesn't look like he has.
If the caucus basically says to Trudeau, we will vote against you on a confidence motion on the 27th, that means the government falls on the 27th. That would raise the possibility that you have Canada going to the polls with a Liberal leader who had lost the confidence of his own caucus ahead of an election before they have time to find a replacement. So they would have to be going into an election with an interim leader, I suppose, in that scenario. So, like I said, there's still too many scenarios up in the air to make a clear prediction about how this is going to end. But we now know that this is going to end sometime between, like, the government is probably going to fall sometime between January 27th and I think April 30th is as far as they could probably take it with the budget.
I don't know how far they can go. I honestly don't. But what I would wonder is if, and I'll take your reaction to this. I don't know. I'm just speculating. Mm-hmm. Are we through the point now where we've been talking a little bit about chaos and stuff like that? And as you said, last week we talked about no more runway. Mm-hmm. Are we now at the point where they are going to be buffeted by so many of these? We're going to end up having one of those accidental election scenarios we were talking about?
Absolutely could happen, yeah. The other thing I would just say is that the reason why nobody wants to make predictions at this point is because there is the X factor in all of this, and that's just chaos theory. A butterfly in Africa has flapped its wings, and we are now heading into some completely unpredictable outcome is now coming as a result of this. So I think that the Conservatives are aware that there's a good I would say 50-50 chance that when they put their non-confidence motion on the floor on the 27th, presuming they can get it to the floor on the 27th, that the NDP might vote to keep confidence in the government on the 27th. In which case, the Conservatives have crafted themselves a win-win scenario either way. In which case, they can come again and say, again, spineless Singh has voted with this government to hold a government that he claims he doesn't have confidence for. He's full of shit. And again, it just, I think, leads credence to their own narrative about Singh is only keeping with this government in order to get his pension vested, which happens in the end of February. So, this is a win-win scenario whether or not the government falls on for the Conservatives, this is a win-win scenario whether or not the government falls on the 27th or not. That's the way that they've managed it. And you have to give credit to the Conservatives. They have done a very masterful job since September, and they're continuing this in terms of slowly eking both the Liberals and the NDP into a narrower range of choices by use of both politics and procedure, which is really interesting to watch.
I was thinking a little bit this break, because this is how I party. I really like to unwind on the holiday. I was thinking about what it must feel like to be Justin Trudeau. And I don't mean the sense of strategy or plans, but the emotions of the moment. He's an experienced politician. He's a calculating guy. But I think when you were describing all those scenarios, Jen, all the different permutations of the way I could go, what I was thinking was being in a room where the walls are closing in on me. And you actually used a phrase that you were using in a political sense. I'm actually going to go with it more in the emotional and the metaphorical sense, which was that the path is narrowing for the NDP and the Liberals, and the Conservatives have been able, and I agree with you, they've done it skillfully. They've been able to gradually narrow the options the government faces. I think that's correct. But what I think they're also doing, and it's funny because I just read over the summer, strongly recommend the new memoir a couple of years ago of U.S. Grant, Civil War general and then president. And there's these chapters about the final weeks of the Civil War where Robert E. Lee still has his army intact, but he is constantly being chased because the Union divisions are closing in, and they're closing in from every direction, and they cannot find respite. There's a battle, they disengage, they flee, and there's 3 more Union divisions coming over the hill from some other direction. And I'm thinking of our politics right now. And look, you can only ever stretch a military metaphor so far, but I think Trudeau has been trading space for time. That's what he's doing. He just like when Freeland dropped the bomb on him, his whole strategy obviously was just get to the end of the week and then it's the holidays. His strategy over the holidays was use the holidays to come up with a plan. They're going to come back in January. They're going to have to try and figure out what they're going to do. And then in the middle of it, the Conservatives throw this grenade into it, which is, well, guess what? We're going to use a committee to start the process. And you're right. The NDP could say, no, we're not into it. Or the Liberals could filibuster it. So I'm not taking it as a guarantee. But everywhere Trudeau turns, there's another Union division coming over the hill. And I was thinking today, I saw a tweet by Tristan Hopper, our buddy, my former, we're all National Post oldies together. He was talking a little bit about how, as he described it, like the Canadian state has thrown the keys to the extremists, he said. I think that's wrong. I know what he's saying, but I think he's articulated it the wrong way. I think the Canadian state has lost its keys. And I think we don't want to admit that yet. And I think right now in Ottawa, we have a bunch of guys looking around being like, I could totally get into my office if I wanted to, but I just choose not to at this moment. And our government is not governmenting right now. Our politicians are politicking. And you've laid out all these scenarios, Jen, of what we can come back and do. And I'm not a procedural nerd, so I have to kind of just take your word on some of that stuff. But I kind of go, okay. But not one of those steps factors in what happens January 21st when the tariffs hit and the dollar goes to 58 cents. So what are we doing?
Yeah, and I think that's also what's really funny as a political watcher here is that there are so many scenarios in the air that I'm having a hard time explaining what the potential outcomes are here. Like I can see it in a web map in my brain, this and this and this and this and this and this and this, and I'm trying to explain what the outcomes of all of those outcomes are, but there's so much in the air still and everything's still so uncertain. It's hard to explain what I think what the most likely outcome and most likely scenario is. I mean, the funny thing, I said this back in September, and I said this when Jagmeet Singh announced that he was ripping up the supply and management agreement, and you and I just laughed, and I was like, "Oh, you could have voted against the government then."
Oh, okay.
No. Then you're not ripping up shit. But I said, look, the smartest strategic thing that Trudeau could have done the next day would have been to drop the writ right then and there. And I would say that
baby. Let's go right now. You want to rip up the agreement? Let's go to the voters.
If he had done that,
you would have won way better.
He would have done better. He would have done better in like an October or November election than he could possibly do now. And he'll do better now than he could possibly do in 3 months.
I think you're right. And the way I've been articulating it is if you look at the seat aggregators right now, and this is obviously an inexact science, but we take it for what it's worth. They're showing the Liberals anywhere from like 30 to 50. And a year ago, it might have been 90, 100. And then a few months after that, it would have been 75. I think every week or two this goes on, they're going to lose another seat. And I don't know, and I've been asking some of my data nerd buddies this, what is absolute rock bottom? Like, what is the Kim Campbell scenario for the Liberals here? I'm hearing anywhere between 12 and 15. Like, it would have to be something almost astonishingly cataclysmic for the Liberals for them to lose specific ridings. But even like one of the recent aggregators showed Papineau up in the air. So Trudeau might lose his seat. Like, we're getting to the point where I don't honestly know how low they can go. I just don't know. And I think Jen is chewing out a kid there. That's okay. I had a kid roaming my basement too. It's harder to do these when the kids are around.
Yes.
But
so
no, I go, like, if I'm advising the Liberals, go now.
Go now. You can only lose the longer that you wait.
This is also maybe your only opportunity to sandbag even slightly the NDP. Because if the NDP come back in January and they decide they're going to rip up with whatever they rip up the writ, like, well, they wouldn't do that, but you know what I mean. The only opportunity the Liberals have to do this on their own terms is by doing it themselves and doing it now.
Which brings me to our second point. And I don't know if you want to do a like and subscribe there, but
I'll keep going for now. We'll like and subscribe before we talk about the U.S. stuff. Let's just keep going.
Okay. So, I mean,
it's a Christmas podcast. We can be informal.
Which brings me to a second point, and that is I think that the Liberals themselves are still highly delusional. And I still think that they're making strategies and decisions based on an absolutely wrong theory of the case of where they are and what's happening around them. I think that enough of them now understand that Trudeau is not coming back. Like, there is no path back for him personally. I think they are still operating under the assumption that if we get a new leader, that we could have a hope. Chrystia Freeland, pinning any kind of hope on Chrystia Freeland or Anita Anand or Champagne or anybody else. Carney, they're still delusional to assume that all of their problems are fundamentally Trudeau problems, and if they can get a new leader, they can have some kind of hope. The idea, and then maybe frame that leader in opposition to the evil Donald Trump. The idea that you could just, I mean, for the sake of argument, stick Chrystia Freeland, prorogue Parliament, hold some kind of internal caucus conversation. Stick a bird on it, stick Chrystia Freeland on it, and then immediately head into an election, and that Freeland or anybody else, but Freeland would say, operate on that assumption, is going to carry enough personal popularity, name recognition, or approval to save you guys from an absolute decimation is Fantasyland.
It's complete Lulu. Yeah,
it's Delulu. It's straight Delulu stuff at this point.
Yeah, it's nuts.
And what I think that these guys don't understand is they're no longer contenders for power. They are right now negotiating whether or not there will be a Liberal Party in 10 years. That's what they're negotiating right now. The fantasy that there's any path to power or victory here. It's very possible that the polls are overstating Pierre's likely success and that he won't have the largest
250 seats. Yeah,
he won't have the largest majority in Canadian history. That's possible.
He'll only have a 30-seat majority.
Yeah, he may only have a normal majority. Okay, that's possible. But I think that a lot of the Liberals who are currently in power need to spend a couple of weeks out of power realizing just how much a lot of Canada has fundamentally lost faith in them. They have lost the mandate of heaven. And they're going to have to spend 20 years to build the trust back up before they are ever contenders for power ever again. That's the reality that I think a lot of them fundamentally are refusing to accept or face. I think that there is a cleaner path for the NDP to be leaders of this country than the Liberals right now.
With a new leader and a whole new strategy.
Yeah, absolutely. The NDP has got some work to do. They have some inner work to do. But I can see, I think it's much more likely to see, say, for example, a Wab Kinew-led federal NDP contesting power against a tired Pierre Poilievre government in 10 years and winning and succeeding in becoming a majority government than for the Liberals to be in a position to do that in 10 years. And I think when enough Liberals start to make that realization, they're going to start bailing ship on the Liberal Party and seeing either other options for paths to power. So they're going to disintegrate I think in a very similar way as the PC party did in Alberta when in 2015. And what happened with the PC party is that, if you recall this, the PCs had been in power for like 43, 44 years. And as the result, everybody who had ambition and everybody who had ambitions toward power went to the PC party, regardless of their ideological affiliation. The PC party was
where the power was.
That's where the power was. Like, it was a big tent party, and you could be pretty kind of left, and you could be kind of right. You couldn't be radically left, but you couldn't be radically right either. But as long as you kind of played it down the middle, and you had any talent, and any background, and any ambition, you went to the PCs if you wanted to do that. And that meant it created like the sucking sound, where anybody with actual ambition or leadership skills, you didn't waste your time with the Liberals, you didn't waste your time with the NDP, you didn't waste your time with any of the Alberta Party or any of these other fringe parties. You had to go where the power was. And so this became a self-perpetuating cycle until it didn't, until it collapsed so catastrophically that the NDP came to power, and also the PCs basically had to retire the brand and completely reform. So I think that the federal liberals are facing that kind of a crisis, where once people start to realize that there's a generational collapse coming, the talent is going to go elsewhere, and that is going to be very, very hard for the Liberals to rebuild from.
After 2018, when the Ontario Liberals got blown out by Doug Ford, there was... I didn't consider it delusional. I thought it was wrong, but I didn't think it was delusional. But I think there was some expectation that the party was going to, the voters spanked us, and we're going to spend 4 years in the benches, but we're going to come back and we're going to be competitive. And what they found out was that, no, they're not. And in 2022, the Liberal Party, I think it slightly improved its vote share, but it didn't mount any actual kind of recovery. And one of the issues in the campaign, and I heard this directly from people who were part of the Liberal campaign, was that they weren't raising money. They weren't vetting candidates properly. They were having a hard time organizing logistics. Now, they were able to fix some of these problems, or they were at least working on them, but that the sinews of the party as a functional political entity had deteriorated in only 4 years. Mm-hmm. And it doesn't take long for a political party to fall apart. And it's interesting talking about the Liberals who are delusional here. There's a faction of the Liberal fan base, and I hear from them occasionally on Twitter, that sincerely believe that there is something in the upcoming Hogue Commission report that is going to destroy Pierre Poilievre and probably the Conservative Party. And I think those people are insane, but I also don't think they're influencing the decision of the actual people who have meaningful power in the Liberal Party. I think the people of meaningful power are probably thinking, oh, we'll get whooped. Yeah, we'll lose a few dozen seats, but then we'll come back and Canadians are going to miss us, and they're going to... And I do think there is a critical mass of Liberals, again, like influential, meaningful ones, not just Twitter lunatics, who are starting to go, holy shit, actually, no. We're not tracking towards a shellacking that leaves us with 80 or 90 seats and a roster of viable successors and a party institution that is functional and raising money. We're looking at 30 seats and all of our cabinet ministers losing, like all of our next generation leaders losing, and all of the donors moving on and losing 4 years of donors. And Pierre Poilievre, as happens to prime ministers, will accumulate baggage and become unpopular. And next time he'll lose 30 or 40 seats and he'll still have a 20 or 30 seat majority. Yeah. And I do think they're figuring this out, because I haven't paid that much attention to the news the last week. I'm trying to not do it. But just reading my hometown paper, the Star was reporting that the Ontario Liberal caucus met, and a majority of remaining Liberal MPs in Ontario now agree that Justin Trudeau has to go. And
great. Thanks, Tips. Thanks for coming out. Where were you a year ago?
I said this to you a few minutes ago, John. I don't know what the fuck we're doing. I just don't, because like, is there an appropriate time for them to make that announcement? Like, are they going to do another open letter? Is it going to be a tweet? Nicely? So, I'm looking at my right in the bottom of my screen here. I'm looking at the clock, looking at the date. We are 24 days away from President Donald Trump. 24 days.
Don't have time. You're out of time. Speaking of parties sort of starting to atrophy, another little shocking headline that came across our feed this week. Where was it? Public Services Minister Jean-Yves Duclos acknowledged in an interview this week when
oh my God,
that the Liberals aren't ready for an election.
Yeah,
they're not ready.
What I think,
the level of delulu, the level of just sheer insanity to not have pulled the emergency trigger switch on election preparedness on September 2nd. These guys aren't even not governmenting. They're not even party managing. They're not even politicking.
They're tactical politicking. They're surviving every day.
They're surviving week to week.
I don't even think it's weekly anymore. I think it's daily.
The daily. Yeah, possibly. So I don't know. Like
that is, so I'm gonna steal a little bit from what I was tweeting this morning. I've basically stayed off Twitter, but today was the day I set aside in my holiday planning. Like I said before, I'm a real fun. This was the day I set aside for like household tasks, and I had a guy come into my house today and just do the annual maintenance on my boiler because like exciting times at the Gurney household. And while he was doing that, I was just sitting in my office, which is just across from the boiler room, and I'm tweeting. One of the things I was tweeting about, I'm starting to think about the piece that either we will write either as columns or we'll write it as some kind of emergency dispatch. But what we will write if and when Justin Trudeau is gone. And if it's after an election, we'll probably save it. We'll do election night reactions stuff. But sooner or later, and I'm starting to think about it, we're going to have to write our legacy of Justin Trudeau columns, maybe a whole series of them. What's wild to me is that I think, history always takes an interesting view, right? There will be things Justin Trudeau will be lauded for. There will things he will be crucified for. We're going to leave that to the judgment of history. But what I cannot explain now is how passive this government has been in the face of reality. And I honestly believe that future historians are going to look at the period of time between the invasion of Ukraine by Russia in 2022 and whenever the Liberals lose. And they're going to honestly ask one simple question. What were they doing? Because nothing happened. Where was all the time and the energy of this government going? Some big procurement items got announced. That's good. But that was all stuff that was overdue. Every major military procurement the Liberals announced after the invasion of Ukraine was basically large things we needed to do and frankly had already waited too long. And Ukraine gave them a little bit of cover to actually go do the things. But we talked about this in the last podcast where in an increasingly difficult time, an increasingly divided domestic time with increasingly challenging economic issues, political issues, geopolitical issues, security issues. When I look at Canadian preparedness basically across the board, maybe with a minor exception that if another COVID happened, I think we would be better off today in terms of having like masks and gloves stockpiled. But otherwise across the board, I think we're worse off. And future historians are going to have to try and figure out what the fuck these guys were doing the last 3 years. And I saw that Duclos headline, and I just laughed at it because what Duclos just did is he took off the table for those future historians. They were focused purely on the electoral side of things because they're not even focused on that. What are they doing? I want someone to tell me. Maybe one of our listeners in official Ottawa can message us completely on off record or on background. Tell us who you are. and tell me, what were you doing the last 3 years? And what did you accomplish?
So
I don't know.
This one quote, I know usually the second I write something, I instantly forget everything that I write, which I think is a healthy impulse for any writer.
I have the exact same thing, and people don't believe that. But people say to me, hey, what was your column about today? I'll say, I don't know.
Literally can't remember. Once it's out of my brain, it's into the ether, and the ether eats it.
Publishing it removes it from my memory.
That's what the writing process fundamentally is. Like, words build up in your head, and it's like steam building, and then you vent the steam, and then it's gone.
Gone. And then it refills, and then you vent again. And
exactly.
People subscribe.
Like steam trains. Yeah. But anyway, I remember this one quote from the article that I wrote just before the actual ballot in 2021. And I'm not going to quote myself perfectly here. I'd have to go find it to quote myself perfectly. But I was commenting on the incredible aimlessness of that election, and just how clear it was to me that however uncertain people were about the evil Aaron O'Toole, good Lord, however uncertain they were about the evil Aaron O'Toole and the Conservatives, the Liberals had failed to present anything resembling a vision. There was no real platform. It was just, them guys be scary, pick us. We want power, pick us over those bad guys who want power.
It worked.
But there was no clear understanding of like, okay, but power for what? Power why? Mm-hmm. What vision? What things do you want to execute? Oh, to child care and to dental care. And I think actually the child care announcement that they did announce probably is what saved them, because I think a lot of people did want a universal child care system. By the way, that's not really what we got. Anybody with kids right now in any kind of daycare system will tell you that actually the way that this is rolled out has been pretty catastrophic in most other provinces. We do not have Quebec-style successful functioning childcare.
We have all the pathologies of Quebec.
We have all the pathologies,
which is very long wait lists.
Yeah, very long wait lists. Like my access to childcare dried up like a water on a hot plane this year. It's a small miracle that I got my kid into any kind of childcare system. So like it's actually been a bit of a freaking disaster. As by the way, I warned you it would be. Do not elect these guys in on a childcare promise. This is because these guys have demonstrated that they can't deliver on these promises, and they didn't, and they can't. But I mean, even that, we're going to tweak the childcare system to create subsidized childcare spaces, or we're going to create like a pharmacare system that covers 2 drugs for people who aren't insured, or we're going to engage on a dental care system that a couple million people are going to take advantage of who are low income. These promises are so piecemeal. They're so poorly executed, and they're so small in their scope and ambition. Oh, remember the school lunches? I don't know if that's collapsed.
School food program, yeah.
A school food program. They're so piecemeal. They're so half-assed, and they're so poorly executed that we might as well not.
If they're executed at all,
they're not worth voting or keeping a government in power. This isn't a visionary leadership here that we're being presented with. And to me, I think that just goes to what you were just saying. What the fuck have you been doing for the last 3 years besides putting forward terrible online harms legislation that's going nowhere, completely half-assed social welfare programs that we know are going to collapse within months, and what? And what? Why? What? I've made this point. You and I've made this point for weeks now. Every single week that you continue to grasp onto power costs you more and more and more, and you're doing nothing with it because you can't, and because you wouldn't know what to do with it, even if you could.
It's a little bit of an unpleasant image, and to any liberals listening, I don't mean this literally. I don't mean you guys any harm, but what it reminds me a little bit of is you see this sometimes. People who are hanging on to like a runaway balloon or a bouncy castle, and their instinct is to hold on tightly, but the correct thing to do is to let go immediately, because you'll fall 10 or 15 feet and you'll break your legs. Yes. But if you hold on another 3 or 4 seconds, you're 40 feet in the air and you're dead.
Yeah.
The smart thing to do is to let go immediately, and it goes against every instinct, and I get it. I think they've already hung on too long. Like, I think they're already at 70 or 80 feet in the air. And with to your other point, though, and I agree with it, talking about kind of the diminishing returns, 2 points I'm going to make that. Then maybe we will drop a like and subscribe. But you can have the last word after this if you have anything to say. 2 quick points I'm going to make. One is that the NDP found that out, right? Because like the NDP would. I'm not here to do Singh's campaigning for him, right? But like, how many times did the NDP have to basically extend the deadline for the Liberals, right? Because it's like, hey, well, we said we were going to do a specific thing by this date, and the Liberals say, oh, yeah, did you mean it? Oh, yeah, we mean it. Oh, okay, well, here's what we can do by that date. There was, and I know that there was some speculation that the Liberals were testing the NDP a little bit, showing them the back of their hand a bit. I think probably that's true to an extent. But I just think the simpler explanation is simply that the Liberals are not good at governing. And I don't remember when I wrote this, but I know I definitely wrote this at least once. The NDP had no excuse being surprised by the Liberals having a hard time delivering what they promised to do. That's kind of their thing. So for the NDP to be like, wow, who would have thought that a Liberal commitment to achieve policy X by date Y would be under pressure? Sorry, guys, you're idiots if you were actually being surprised by that. So I think actually credit to the NDP. I think they did put a bit of a leash on them. But the bigger point, Jen, is that as the Liberals come unglued, and it's happening now, exactly the point you were making a couple of minutes ago is being made by Liberals. They're making it in different ways. They don't have your charm and interpersonal skills. But
I'm known for my interpersonal skills. They're top. That's top tier.
Top flight. Yeah.
That's if you're a politician in Canada and you are not matching my interpersonal skills, my goodness.
99.9 percentile. What they're saying is we need a new policy agenda to excite Canadians. Like that would be the way they would describe it. Or we need to provide concrete solutions that speak to the concerns of the moment. So when the Liberals are talking about themselves, they do have a different way of putting it. But what they're saying is the same thing that you're saying. We don't know what we're doing either. So when members of the Liberal caucus are out there going, we'd better come up with something to sell the voters, that's a confession. It's an accurate confession, but it's a confession. And I'm seeing this pop up in very careful comments by Liberal MPs and other Liberal adjacent people. Liberal friendly or Liberal coded media pundits are making the same point. Justin Trudeau, since Freeland's letter dropped, has bought himself a few weeks. What has he used them for? What has the Prime Minister or the Liberal Party or the Cabinet or the caucus or whatever, what have they accomplished since Freeland's letter?
What have they accomplished?
Left them or the country better off?
What have they accomplished since September when I told them to drop the rate back then? They've reduced their entire raison d'etre as a party to keeping the bad man out of power. That's the only reason they're continuing to cling to power, which at some point you have to acknowledge is well, no, but if that is your only raison d'etre, if your only reason for continuing to cling onto power is to keep the bad man out of power, the bad man who's 20 plus points ahead of you in the polls, the bad man who is going to decimate you with probably a historic majority, there's a certain point where you have to come to terms with the fact that you've created a raison d'etre that is ultimately opposing the will of the people you're supposed to be representing.
Yeah.
That's your raison d'etre. I'm going to save my voters from themselves.
Forestall democracy.
I'm going to forestall democracy. Like, I don't know. Like, this is a bad strategy to be running on, guys. Like you guys can't be trusted to know that this guy is the bad man. So therefore, I will cling to power for as long as humanly possible to protect you from the thing you want to vote for. Guys, like, stop. Think this through. The other thing that I thought that was really funny about all this is, remember when, like, I don't know if you watch all the panels when people were coming forward in public and calling upon Justin Trudeau to resign. So Liberals coming forward and calling on Justin Trudeau to resign or consider his time.
Watch some of them because it was entertaining. I didn't watch them all.
Okay, do you want to know what almost all of them did while they were calling on Justin Trudeau to resign?
Well, I mean, normally the ones I watch would all sing the man's praises. And
No. Yeah, that too. They were all repeating the same talking points. We have to keep Pierre Poilievre's cuts. Cuts. He's going to cut. We have to protect Canadians from Pierre Poilievre's cuts. So while they're calling on their own leader to resign and demonstrating lack of confidence in their own political leadership, they could not help themselves but to all repeat the same talking points like little trained seals again and again and again. All of them. It's the same phrase. It's the same phrase from all of them. And that's not even before I get into the question about whether or not Pierre Poilievre is going to cut and what he's going to cut and whether or not it's good that he should be maybe considering cuts. I mean, even the ones who were most independent, most willing to come right out and say the obvious things are still so fucking delusional that they're doing it while repeating the party's their own leadership talking points. You're done. Time to move on, folks. And as I said, I would just reiterate this point before we put a pin in it and move on to the next topic. If you had dropped the writ in September, you'd be in a better position than you are now.
If you'd let go of the bouncy castle, you'd have busted your legs.
If you had dropped the writ in October, you wouldn't have lost Freeland. If you drop the writ now, you're probably looking at a broken spine, but and if you wait till March, if you wait until your hand is forced, you may not get up again. Take that advice for whatever it's worth to you.
Like and subscribe. Costs are going up everywhere, and now streaming could cost you more. Why? Because the federal government has decided to tax your streaming services. That's right. They want you to pay more for the shows and music you love. This new tax could make life even more unaffordable. To learn more, visit scrapthestreamingtax.ca, brought to you by the Digital Media Association. So because the Line podcast is a serious platform for hard-hitting journalism, Jen and I are both been snacking. We took like a quick little 5-minute break between the segments here. Look at the size of this Toblerone. And I'm not holding this close to the camera. Like, this thing is like an eye patch.
Also, I'm waving around one of my fountain pens. It's not one of the pens that my father gave me in order to make him, he made mention of that last podcast that I did. He was just like, oh, I see I got competition. I'm like, yeah, you do, Dad. Where's my special request ebonite black pen for my book in celebration for my book, which isn't done yet?
There we go.
There you go.
Questions in need of answers.
Absolutely.
So, just to recap what we said in the first segment there, and we'll hit this point a few more times. Our next podcast will be released on the normal schedule, but it will be recorded early. Jen and I are going to try and take some time off next week, actually, in a stretch of days after New Year. So our first podcast of 2025, this will be the last one for this year. Our first podcast of 2025 will be a bit of a special edition of the Line podcast. We're not going to be responding to the news because we're not going to know what's happened. We're going to be responding to your questions. Who do I mean by your? Paid subscribers at readtheline.ca. Only people who leave comments under the Substack post, and only people who are paid commenters can do that, are going to get their questions answered. Twitter, YouTube, Spotify, Apple, not going to work. It's not that we don't love those platforms. We do. But this is a subscriber-only perk we are offering to our favorite people, our subscribers. So this podcast, as always, will go up on readtheline.ca. The comments will be open on it. You can also check out our gratitude series, which is continuing right now. Those articles are still coming out. We hope you do. We hope you like and subscribe. Leave your questions under the post on Substack for this podcast at readtheline.ca. You can ask questions generally for Jen or myself. You can specify questions for us individually. Doesn't matter. We'll have some fun with that. We'll get that podcast out for you, and then we'll hit the ground running. January 6th, we're going to come back, and we will see what fresh hell has befallen us, because that seems to be life covering the news these days.
I will also say that this might be the podcast where I bring out the whiteboard, where I start charting out all of the potential possibilities for Canadian politics. That this actually might be the time to go full whiteboard. Alex Jones style. The frogs are gay.
Frogs apparently were gay. One of our listeners was adamant about that. We're going to talk America. America. You're an American. That's right.
Oh, say
from America.
You see?
But I want to lead into this by actually talking about Jennifer Gerson, because I'm lauding you. Now, don't worry. This is me giving you props, as the kids said 10 years ago.
Once?
No, I give props. I am a prop giver. That's what I'm known for. You're known for your 99.9% interpersonal skills. I'm known for
my charming wit and personality. Destined for politics.
Exactly, yeah. Gerson for PM. Or governor, depending, because as we'll get into
depending on how this goes.
I think you were right a few weeks ago. And I didn't think you were wrong a few weeks ago, but I'm starting to come around from an open-minded position to a settled position, which is lining up behind you. A few weeks ago, Jen said, sure, Trump is trolling us when he talks about annexing us at that dinner the PM had at Mar-a-Lago. But it's also a trial balloon. And again, I was open-minded to that. But I think everything that has happened since, including Trump also making comments about purchasing Greenland and the U.S. resuming direct ownership and control of the Panama Canal, every time he says something like this, Canada should be the 51st state, U.S. should buy Greenland, or the United States should resume control of the Panama Canal, in the right-wing media ecosystem in the U.S., proxies start popping up. And they've got their talking points. And now these ideas are circulating. Canadians here, we talked about Stockwell Day a week ago, or like just asking questions. Now, I'm not saying there was some strategy meeting at Mar-a-Lago where Stockwell Day was handed a script. I don't think it was like that.
No, trial ballooning is way more informal than that. And the reason why you do this under the guise of jest is if the trial balloon falls fat, you go,
you were just kidding.
A joke. That's what trial ballooning is. It's not the same thing as an actual comms strategy. It's not like this is throwing stuff at a wall and seeing if there's any spaghetti that sticks. What's interesting is that this particular thread of spaghetti is sticking.
This Toblerone is delicious, but yes, you were right. It is starting to stick to the wall.
And I would also note that this week we have Kevin O'Leary coming out, and he's now coming out and saying, I'm offering my services to negotiate some kind of economic union with the U.S. And I'm going to grab
you
this
got the quote directly?
Here.
Okay, it's fine. I pulled it up too. Yeah, you quoted directly though. You got it.
Okay, so this is what O'Leary has been quoted as saying. Think about the power of combining the two economies, erasing the border between Canada and the United States, and putting all that resource up to the northern borders where China and Russia are knocking on the door, O'Leary continued. So secure the northern territories, give a common currency, figure out taxes across the board, get everything trading both ways, create a new, almost EU-like passport. I like this idea, and at least half of Canadians are interested, he asserted. Now, I don't know where he's getting this assumption that half of Canadians are interested. I don't know what data he's using. I mean, the amount of interest among Canadians toward changing our relationship to the United States, I think is going to be directly proportional to what kind of deal the U.S. is potentially willing to consider or entertain. I mean, one thing that I noted yesterday is that it's one of Stockwell Day's rumors, and again, this is just rumor. This is nothing's been formally proposed here. Was giving Canadians turning over our dollars at a 1-to-1 ratio, which would represent probably the most significant wealth increase to Canadians in 100-year history, and the last 100 years worth of history. I mean, I think that we could do the math on that, but that would single-handedly increase the familial and generational wealth of every Canadian living in a one-time wealth transfer that would be unprecedented.
Literally, I just punched in the numbers. It would mean every dollar I have would become worth the purchasing power equivalent today of $1.44.
Yeah,
so it would be a 44% increase.
It would be a 44% increase in all of your wealth.
Yeah.
And it wouldn't even necessarily cost America anything, I don't think, because I don't even think it would have I mean, again, here I'm out of my depth.
Slightly inflationary thing. It would be equivalent of running a printing press.
But it might be slightly inflationary, but is it slightly inflationary if you're effectively increasing the size of your economic union by 40 million people? I don't even know that that's true. I don't know. Like, I think that the amount of money that would need to be compared to how many greenbacks are circulating in the global economy. I don't even know if they would feel the blip. But anyway, but that's a question for mathy people. I'm not a mathy person. Don't ask me to answer that one.
No, but you're heavy on the interpersonal skills, not heavy on the numeracy.
That's correct. I mean, I bring a lot to the table, clearly. Mm-hmm. So there's a couple of points here. Again, I still think that we're in blue skying territory. I don't think we're in serious proposal territory. I when I say trial balloon, I still mean trial balloon. I don't know if this goes anywhere. But some of the usual suspects, kind of liberal adjacent suspects on Twitter, are responding to Kevin O'Leary's proposal here by using words like traitor. It's traitorous to be even entertaining this at this point. So they clearly want to clamp down any chatter or interest. And for me, that tells me one of two things. And one is there actually is some interest here, because you wouldn't have to start accusing people of being traitorous if there weren't. Secondly, I just laughed when I saw some of that stuff because I'm like, we literally have a party in Parliament that is devoted to breaking up Canada. We have a secessionist party in Parliament that has been tolerated for decades. The country has lost any capacity to be precious. It's lost any moral ability that it might have to start tut-tutting anyone who talks about an economic union with America. Like, I'm sorry, what are you operating under the assumption that only Quebec can threaten to break up the country?
That's exactly it, yes. And first of all, when I say that's it, Jen, I mean, first of all, that's it in that you have made a trenchant observation, but also that's it as in, yeah.
Yes, only Quebec has the right to renegotiate its relationship with the rest of the country. The rest of us have to put up and shut up.
When Quebec does it, it's part of their distinct society. When Kevin O'Leary does it, he's a traitor.
That's right. The hypocrisy of that is just non-sustainable. I mean, I like maybe 10 years ago you'd get away with that. I think nowadays no one gives a shit anymore. If you, I just don't think that you have the moral authority to declare someone a traitor for playing with these ideas anymore. And you lost the moral authority when you tolerated Quebec succession, Quebec separation, and enabled and empowered it to the degree that you effectively have done. So moving on, calling someone traitorous for blue skying these ideas to me is just laughable. It's an utterly laughable proposition, and it's completely unsustainable with the fact that essentially you have a separatist party maintaining a significant wedge on power in Parliament to this day.
Well, it would also be a little more sustainable if the response of our political class in this country had been adamant and passionate rejection of the notion of Quebec sovereignty. One Canada under God, indivisible. Here I'm borrowing an American term, which is probably not helpful. Instead, what we have seen since 1995, and even leading up to 1995, was wheeling and dealing with Quebec.
And successive ceding of more and more of Quebec's demands to the extent that effectively we've given the sovereigntists everything that they've wanted.
You know, I mentioned in the first segment that I'm thinking about the pieces we'll write collectively or individually when Justin Trudeau is done. The good and the bad and the ugly and the mysterious. And one of the ones that I think it's probably filed under bad, ugly, and mysterious. And I feel like I'm kind of ripping myself off. I'm stealing my future ideas here. Spoilers. But it's just, I don't know how well history is going to regard us lowering the flags for months on end around the unmarked graves.
Yep.
And I know that seems like I'm reaching for another, like I'm reaching into the past here. And I'm not even commenting on residential schools and generational trauma. I'm just saying people at the time observed that there were absurdities here for the prime minister. I am the leader of a genocidal nation. Come out to Ottawa for Canada Day. Like, it was weird even at the time. And then we got into, and I remember I was thinking about it because I've been thinking about this in the last few days, how absurd it was, is because we always lower the flags for Remembrance Day, but they were already lowered. So we had to like raise them to lower them again.
And I think it was the Mohawk Nation that basically is like, you really need to like raise the flags again so that we can honor our veterans by lowering the flags again.
And in the next few months and years, I think it's becoming increasingly clear, and I said this in our last podcast, whatever else Donald Trump is, he's a negotiator. And he has identified weaknesses in Canada, and he's exploiting them. Mm-hmm. And no pun intended, but it's hard to rally around the flag when it's at fucking half-mast.
All right, and then the second...
It's whipping me in the face in the breeze. It should be up.
All right. The second thing we would just point out here is let's look at really what Kevin O'Leary is proposing here. The traitor. Firstly, he's not proposing ceding sovereignty. He's not proposing becoming 51st state. What he's proposing is an economic
very careful,
union.
Actually. Like, I think,
Quite carefully.
You had that quote. I think I still have it here. You don't, sorry, I don't know if this is part of your quote. You don't have to sell or merge the country, but create a union where you put together the things that matter. He's one of the only people responding in the way Trump wants to be talked to.
I would also
it's a deal.
Look, if you cared about Canadian sovereignty and the idea of an independent Canadian polity as strongly as you suddenly seem to, your behaviors over the last 20, 30 years of successive governments sure have not demonstrated that. No, you just haven't.
The proud sovereign state we are with a well-trained, funded, and equipped armed forces, strong democratic institutions, united economic union that has dismantled internal barriers, no mollycoddling of those Quebec separatists, a strong, united, sovereign Canada that had a resolute and coordinated response to credible claims of foreign electoral interference, because a Canadian is a Canadian is a Canadian.
Or how about a strong, resolute Canada that actually had some kind of vision or cooperative vision or narrative that it could all get behind? I don't know. I can't just blame Trudeau for this, because it's been generations of successive governments that have allowed the very concept of Canada to collapse as a sovereign nation in all but technicality, and now expecting everybody to rally around the flag the moment when somebody calls us out on it, or now expecting that some sovereignty, some notion of sovereignty will continue to exist on principle because they maintain some kind of moral suasion when they don't. I don't know. It's not there. But anyway, what Leary is actually proposing here isn't a collapse of sovereignty so much as it's a more integrated economic union. By the way, that's not a bad idea.
Make me an offer. Put an offer in front of me. Like I might hate the offer, but here's the thing, I don't want to be American. I'm
perfectly happy to be a Canadian, and I want to maintain our Westminster style of democracy. I don't want to live in a republic. I like a lot of the social services that we have in this country. That's good. But look, if you want to create a common currency and have me trade in all of my wealth at 1-to-1 to American dollars, great. You want to create a more sensible taxation system that operates, corporate and income tax taxation system that operates across the borders, or operates 1-to-1 across the borders? That's great. Okay. You want to completely eliminate the border for the purposes of trading goods and services? Okay. You want to create an
defense
EU
perimeter?
Yeah, sure. An integrated military and a shared defense perimeter? Okay. You want to create an EU-style passport that would give Canadians more opportunity to live and work within the United States? Okay. Again, how you work out the technicals of a lot of this stuff is where the devil comes in the details. How do we maintain some concept of national sovereignty with an EU-style passport? Well, the Europeans figured out how to do it, didn't they? As I said, this isn't even a bad sort of bird's eye view proposal. It isn't.
It's
and
fascinating.
Actually, if you consider how much money and time and effort we're going to have to put into rebuilding essentially our military, this might be a radically better option for us than trying to go it alone. I think it's worth considering. I think it's worth. Let's see. Like I would be open to an economic union of some kind, a closer economic union. That potentially does make sense to me.
It's not a new idea. People have been talking about Fortress North America for a long time. I don't want to be American, but we have to negotiate from a position of reality. I'll make this case for the Prime Minister. I think he's been right so far to ignore the taunting. People have been like, well, the Panamanian president said something immediately when Trump talked about the canal. He's been calling it the United States Canal, which I shouldn't laugh, but I did. I understand the PM's thinking and just kind of ignoring it. But the problem is, like I said in the last segment, we're 24 days away from inauguration. We can ignore the Truth Social posts. But if our trade delegation shows up and the U.S. puts a North American Union proposal on the table, we better figure out what our position is. Well,
also, we can't poo-poo that just because it's Donald Trump. Now, as I said, okay, so obviously there's a faction within Trump land right now that has a bit of an expansionist bent.
Yeah, okay. They want their own Louisiana purchase.
They want to create a bit of a historic thing for themselves or whatever else. Okay, fine. Who knows whether or not that faction will still be in power in 6 months? Okay, so I mean, like at this point, I'm using this word twice already. I'm going to use it again. We're blue skying here, guys. We're not seriously thinking here. But if the Americans come to us with a really compelling economic union proposal, I should hope that we would be mature enough not to necessarily poo-poo a proposal that would have significant benefits for every Canadian from now until the end of time, just because the bad man's proposing it.
We're definitely not that mature.
Okay. All right. Just checking.
There actually is. And again, Kevin O'Leary he's an interesting dude, and I'll leave it at that. But I've been joking with you in recent weeks, like, thank God for Wayne Gretzky, who apparently Trump has been trying to Shanghai into being the governor of the new state of Canada, which, oh God. But like,
honestly, we've done worse.
Why not?
I'm not even opposed.
Governor, great one. Mm-hmm. We're going to need to figure out what our negotiating position is and who's negotiating it. And I was reading, because I'm trying not to read the news this week, but apparently Dominic LeBlanc and Melanie Joly are down south, or preparing to head down south to talk with the Trump team about borders. And I'm like, oh my God. And, in the first segment, we talked about why the Liberals need to let go of the bouncy castle when they're at 15 feet in the air instead of 40 or 80. That was me appealing to their instinct for self-preservation, assuming they have any left. And frankly, I think evidence for that is lacking. But 24 days until we're negotiating with Mr. Trump. Now, I think there's an actual natural thing for us to do here. Mr. Trump is currently close to Elon Musk of SpaceX. I don't think that's going to last. That's too much ego for someone. That's not going to last. But
it will not. In fact, I'm at this rate. I think it's not going to last till inauguration day.
Yeah,
we'll see exactly where Elon Musk is sitting in the Trump world by seeing where he's physically positioned next to Trump on inauguration day. If he's like front, center, and middle, then you'll be able to read that he's still in the club. And if he's like in the back row, well.
I think he's already survived one full Scaramucci interval, though. So
that's fair.
But the obvious thing here is if Mr. Trump is looking for like a signature Louisiana style purchase, the moon. Go to the moon. Just spitballing that. The first.
Blue sky and sure, why not?
The first extraterrestrial president. Establish an American territory on the moon.
I like the vision. I like the ambition.
The other thing, purely as a matter of strategic self-interest for us, one of the only things we have going for us is that there is a reasonable chance that if we can navigate the first 6 months of a Trump presidency, it will turn into such a chaotic shit show.
Oh, they'll ignore us.
That will be okay.
Yeah.
I don't take that totally for granted. There is a chance, I think, that this Trump team will be functionally different than the first one. Lessons have presumably been learned, maybe not by Mr. Trump, but probably by some of the people around him. It is possible they staff up a more competent administration. You and I have spoken about how it's going to be difficult for them because there are going to be different competing power centers around the Court of Mar-a-Lago. It's going to be a bit of a shit show here. So I don't think we can take for granted that we have as much chaos working in our favor as there was last time, but it's still a reasonable chance. Could happen.
Could happen. Anyway, this is. I'd have to bring the whiteboard out again. It's not Alex Jones. It's Glenn Beck. I'm thinking of, like, bring up the chalkboard. Like, this could happen and this could happen. Anyway, be a great prop.
If you want to go buy a whiteboard, just expensive.
Courtesy of the Line subscribers. Look, I think that we are out of things to say, except for the fact to remind people that we are going to be having a fun podcast, early podcast recording in a couple of days, so that we can take some time off. We are taking questions, concerns, comments for our paid subscribers only. So if you want to ask us some random question about politics or anything really, we're very open here. Just put the question underneath the post at Substack that we're going to publish this to, and we'll take it.
Readtheline.ca. No other. Every other question will be aggressively ignored.
Aggressively ignored.
We are throwing this as a perk for our paid subscribers because we love them. We like the rest of you, but we love them.
We do. And on that note, I would like to say like and subscribe to The Line, and keep following us through the new year, because things are not going to settle down even a little bit.
The 51st state should be the moon. Just okay.
All right. Goodbye.